Well, look, why is it important to work on green? I mean, we have the most extraordinary challenge facing the planet and facing our species, which is that climate change is happening at an accelerated rate. We are travelling at a faster direction than we ever thought. We are now looking at a world in the middle part of this century of more like 3 to 4 degrees Celsius warming than the 1 to 2 we're targeting. And that means probably over land about an average of 8 to 10 degrees warming. It means increased sea level rises, it means drought and rainfall instead of steady rain, it means famine, it means a whole range of things which we cannot even begin to imagine. And we need to address this. You know, at the current trajectory, the way we're going now, and let me just be clear about this. We've been talking for the last 30 years about addressing climate change in UN conferences. In that same 30 years, we have put more greenhouse gases into the atmosphere than we did in the previous 150 years. We have done nothing in practice to get emissions down. The International Panel on Climate Change, in its landmark report last year, said to have even a half a chance of a future for our kids and our grandchildren, we've got to get emissions down 45 to 50% in 10 years. That is extraordinary. They went up last year. That is halving emissions globally. And you know who will suffer when we don't do this? It's the poor of Africa. Africa is one of the most vulnerable continents, if not the most vulnerable continent to climate change. You know, we experienced climate change in the 1600s. We actually had global cooling because, ironically enough, smallpox and measles from white folk killed off Indians in the Americas. And we had massive regrowth of forests as cities were abandoned. 95% of people died in 100 years. And that massive regrowth, sucking down carbon, cooling the atmosphere, led to long winters, a failure of crops in China, in Japan, in Africa, as well as in Europe. We saw war, we saw pestilence, and we saw famine, the norm. We lost a third of the world's population in the 1600s with 2-degree cooling. This is what we're looking at for the rest of this century. We are looking at war, at famine and pestilence going forward. And that is not a great future for our children. So that's why we need to act. Let me drive this home to you in a very concrete way. We've currently in the atmosphere got about 415 parts per million of CO2 equivalent. We had about 250 150 years ago. By the end of this century, we expected to have 800. You know when you've been in a meeting for 3 hours and the windows have been closed, the air conditioning's off and you're getting really stuffy and woozy and you have to decide you've got to go out and get some fresh air. That's what 800 ppm is like. That's what the whole planet is going to be like in 100 years. And we don't actually know whether humans can survive in that. They never have. This species has never existed in an atmosphere with that much greenhouse gas in it. So this is a potential extinction of the species, folks. That's why we've got to do it. There's sort of no choice. Now the question is, how do we do it, right? We kind of know what to do. We've got the solution set laid out by endless scientists and bodies. It's clean energy. It's getting out of diesel and petrol into low carbon transport, electric transport. It's sustainable energy. It's clean water, reduced methane from wastewater management. All of these are part of the solution. It's not exactly rocket science. We've just got to do it. And because we've now lost the first half of the fight against climate change, we're going to have extreme weather this century anyway. It's only a matter of how extreme. We have to start thinking about resilience. Resilience means how do we support countries that are going to be most affected by extreme weather? In Africa, how do we ensure that they are rich to cope with the famines and floods that are going to come through so they can rebuild infrastructure? How can we be sure that they are functioning well so that when they do hit by a crisis, they don't fall over like Somalia fell over, like Syria fell over? We don't want that kind of future. And the rich don't want that kind of future either. Europe's not going to be able to cope with 100 million people trying to cross the Mediterranean as we suffer country collapse after country collapse in Africa. They need Africa to be richer, wealthier, and more resilient as well. This is the species-defying challenge. If we do this, if we get over this extraordinary challenge that we've created, we move to a different era. We move to an era where we actually manage our planet sustainably. We become stewards. We have to become stewards. There's no other choice. And that requires a lot of capital because nearly everything we've done, everything we're talking about, needs investment. There's not enough public money. 80% of it is about building cities like Abidjan, like Lagos, like Nairobi, that have to be green and clean and productive and places where people moving off the land can find jobs and find work. That is the challenge. And if we do it, which is about application of capital in common sense ways, we create jobs. We create future. We do create that wealth. We create schools and universities. We create a future that we can be proud of for Africa and for the world, frankly. So that's the challenge. Now, the question is, can we do that? And how do we do it? It's about how you mobilise capital. You know, we do have this bit of luck on the planet at the moment, which is, it's kind of bizarre, but we've got more capital on the planet now than ever before in human history. And huge slabs of that capital are sitting in negative and zero interest rate instruments like German bonds, like Japanese government bonds. In other words, they're not earning any money. And that's pension fund. That's like my pension fund money, right? That needs yield. This is like extraordinary. So imagine on this side of the room, we have a huge set of problems, a species-defying challenge. And the solution set is made up of a whole lot of investments in things like green cities and transport and infrastructure that we know pays a dividend. This is not investing in gunboats like Mozambique did. This is stuff that helps our economies. And over here, we have a large pile of money sitting around with nowhere to go. It's sitting in the wrong place and not earning enough yield to pay pensions. Hey, we just got to bring these two things together. I mean, this pile is $100 trillion, right? It's a big pile. The US economy is about 17 trillion GDP. This is a big pile of money. If we can make it flow, we've got a chance. And that's the role of bankers. That's the role of development banks to provide risk mitigation to crowd in public capital. That's the role of regulators to provide rule sets to make it easier. That's the role of the rich countries to make sure that the capital that gets to Lagos and Abidjan and Dakar is lower cost capital than otherwise they would get. So when the mayor of Dakar can just make a simple decision, I'll build a railway, hey, it's cheaper anyway than the freeway because the capital cost is there. That's how we do it. We still get enough yield to pay my pension back in Europe. Like this is like a partnership, right? Partnership to save the planet. Neither side has any future if we don't do this. Should be easy. And green bonds are the proof. We've seen this incredible growth of green bonds the last few years. You know, went from 10 billion to 100 billion to 167 billion, 250 billion this year. We're going to crack $1 trillion next year. Like, this is amazing. And that shows you if you create the product, the right product, which is what regulators, bankers, development banks can get together to do to make sure capital flows, the investors will move. They'll move like the wildebeest in the Rift Valley in the Great Transition. And this is what we're going to see. This is what we have to see. So what we're talking about today is getting it moving. I don't believe we're not going to do this. I think we're going to do this. I think the challenge is now, can we do it fast enough? Can we do it fast enough to head off that really grim future? 10 years we got. In 10 years, we have to see a massive change to emissions, 50% reductions. And it's not just the US's problem. It is their problem. It's not just China's problem. It's all of our problem. Everyone's got to do this.